Dr. Chopra.
I'm sorry for the...
Oh, it's quite all right. There's no problem at all.
Okay.
Thank you for setting aside some time for me today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay. Are you all set to begin?
Yes. Are we recording this?
Yes. Is that okay?
And is this for what? For a radio show?
It's for a book of interviews that I'm doing with New Age thinkers, like Fritjof Capra and so forth. Okay. In Return of the Rishi, you describe how you were trained in India as a medical doctor, but that you didn't really become acquainted with traditional Eastern approaches to medicine until you came to America.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe how this journey from east to west and then back again transformed your worldview from a materialistic one to a spiritual one?
Yeah, I trained in Boston in internal medicine and also in endocrinology, and my training was in neuroendocrinology, which is the study of brain chemicals, and this was in the 1970s. And it became obvious to me as I was doing my studies that there was this very exciting new frontier that interfaced both consciousness and material reality. Neuropeptides, which were discovered about that time, were literally the material messengers from inner space, if you want to call it that. And I became aware that there was a whole body of knowledge in the East that regarded material reality as the byproduct or the epiphenomenon of non-material reality, which is, of course, consciousness, and that this understanding could the understanding of this non-material reality could possibly have a role in healing and in transformation. So I began to embark on my own personal journey through meditation and through studying Ayurveda, at the same time as, perfectly well grounded in the very sophisticated understanding of neurochemicals and brain chemistry and brain physiology. I started to also study the physiology of meditation. I went back to India many times, studied with Ayurvedic physicians, and once I got familiar with the whole theoretical framework of healing as it has been articulated in a very, very sound body of knowledge for several thousand years in India, I also realized that this was just a stepping stone to really knowing and exploring an even deeper reality in consciousness, which we call spirit. So it was a very gradual transformation over many, many years. Ayurveda is only a sub-Veda. It's part of the larger body of knowledge called Veda or Vedanta, which really is all about spiritual transformation.
You've mentioned that the scientific worldview of the West surprisingly supports the vision of the ancient sages of India. Could you describe some of the ways that Western science supports Eastern spirituality?
I would say it depends on how you interpret Western science. Because there are a lot of scientists in the West who are pure materialists and may not agree with what I have to say. And yet, as we go into the most recent explorations of quantum physics, I think we are unable to escape the conclusion that the essential nature of the material world is that it's not material, that the essential nature of the physical world is that it's not physical, that the essential stuff of the universe is non-stuff. But this non-stuff is not just ordinary non-stuff in that it's not a nothingness. It's a void that isn't a void at all, but the fullness of information and energy. And that actually, if we go beyond the information and energy, it's more than that. It's intelligence. And if it's intelligence, then it must be consciousness. So consciousness becomes the raw material of creation. Consciousness conceives and governs and constructs and ultimately becomes physical reality. If you look at anything that's material, anything, whether it's my human body or the table that is here before me, or the chair that I'm sitting on, you can break it down to its essential components, which are atoms. The atoms, in turn, are particles that are moving at lightning speeds around huge empty spaces. And in turn, those particles are not material things. They are fluctuations of energy and information in a huge void. Seen through the eyes of a physicist, this chair and this table and this body are proportionately as void as intergalactic space. And even those particles, which we call fluctuations of energy and information, are actually intersections of fields. They are mathematical ghosts. They are probability amplitudes. So ultimately, in reality, we are being fooled by our senses. The senses tell us that there's a material world out there, but what is really out there is a radically ambiguous and ceaselessly flowing quantum soup. And the magic occurs in our perception, in that somehow through our sensory apparatus, we decode that field of information and energy into trees and stars and physical bodies and thoughts. But that is, in fact, the same way that a radio traps a field of information and energy and creates a symphony out of it, or a television set traps the field of information and energy and creates a soap opera out of it. Right now, the space around me has all this infinite amount of energy and information. There's every radio program and every television program, every cosmic ray, every microwave, every radio wave, all this huge immensity of information and energy is present in every cubic millimeter of space in the entire universe. And there's so much activity in what we see as nothingness, and actually what we see as the material world is less than 1/1000th of a billionth of a billionth of that, and we think that's where the activity is. Most of the activity is in the unmanifest. And the unmanifest is not just information and energy. It has self-referral feedback loops. It feeds back upon its own self. And as it does that, it creates loops. And that's what intelligence is. And the only difference between intelligence and ordinary information is that intelligence is information which has the ability to evolve, to learn from its own experience, to actually successively create more abstract, more flexible, more abstract, and therefore more creative expressions of its own self. So we begin with chaos, and then out of that chaotic soup of intelligence, there emerges order, and then chaos again, and then order again. And this is the way consciousness behaves. So I think the quantum vision of scientists and the sacred vision of rishis is essentially getting us to the same place.
Would you equate the quantum field with the Hindu conception of Brahman, or does Brahman transcend even that?
Brahman transcends the quantum field because Brahman is intelligence, and the quantum field right now, as we understand it, is defined as a continuum of probability amplitudes for space-time events. So there are probabilities built into the field.
Yeah.
And Brahman is beyond that. It's even beyond the probability. It's the field of pure potentiality.
Okay. You have articulated a kind of philosophy of wish fulfillment throughout your work. For example, you say that when we have a desire, our slightest intentions are rippling across the universe at the quantum level. Can you explain how our desires are fulfilled or frustrated through their relationship to the quantum field?
Yes. I look at desire or intention as a force in nature, just like